Welcome to the His Eternal Word podcast. I am your host, Rakeyia Collins, and the purpose of this podcast is to read the Bible from beginning to end every single year. If that mission sounds interesting to you, I'd encourage you to grab your Bible and read along with me. On today's episode, we are going to be reading 4 chapters rather than 3. We're going to go from chapter 22 through to 26 on today's episode. So, chapter 22, the sacrifice of Isaac. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood of the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went, both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So they went, both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. Now after these things it was told to Abraham, "Behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Chisad, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Rumiah, bore Tabah, Gaham, Tahash, and Makkah. So for chapter 22, the main items that I want to highlight are going to be the way that God describes Isaac. It is obvious that this is a foreshadowing to Jesus and how God is sending his one and only son on this planet to die for us. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. It is important for us to know and to feel this because, again, it is obvious that in the moment, you can be reading the word and you're just going through and you're reading it, but you have to think about the way that this was presented to Abraham as well. This is his son. He just gave up his other son, and now he actually has the son that he wanted from his wife. And now this son, God is asking for this son that he loves, his one and only son, to be given as a sacrifice. The way this is phrased, for me, I honestly was expecting some type of pushback. Even reading this, it's fascinating to me that between verses 2 and verses 3, we don't see any additional dialogue. Abraham gave dialogue when it came down to Sodom. We saw that in the previous chapters where Abraham was bold enough to go back and forth with the Lord about 50 people being righteous, or 45 or 30, or like he kept going back and forth with God. But when it came down to his son, he just simply obeyed. He just simply obeyed. He didn't say anything. Literally, we don't see any back and forth between these verses. And he gave up a bit more of a fight when it came down to Sodom and God being just. But in this regard, he just didn't ask. He didn't ask anything. And the other item in chapter 22 that I want to highlight is going to come from verse 8, where it says, "Then Abraham said to his young men, 'Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you.'" At this point, Abraham is in full knowledge that Isaac is going to be the sacrifice. He is in full knowledge of it. But this is how you know that you are in an intimate relationship with someone, is that he has full trust in God. Whether God was going to bring Isaac back from the dead, whether he was just going to replace him, whether he was going to stop time, whatever he was going to do, he just trusted in God. He obeyed the voice of the Lord. And that is so critical, because I think one of the main things that, speaking from today's time, that we all need to do a better job at is actually listening to the voice of the Lord, even if it's something that we don't necessarily want to hear. But we know that it's the Lord because it's pushing us in our faith and it's causing us to step out on faith. While we haven't gotten further into the Bible, there are a lot of verses that speak about being able to hear the voice of the Lord and being a sheep and knowing the voice of the Lord. And so as we continue in our journey of reading the Bible, just remember that that is what we are trying to do throughout this that's the whole purpose of this podcast, is for us to listen and hear the word of God, and to make sure that throughout our lives, throughout our day to day, that we're constantly making sure that we're listening and adhering to the voice of God. So let's go ahead and dive into Genesis 23. Sarah's death and burial. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up from before his bed and said to the Hittites, "I am a sojourner and a foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight." The Hittites answered Abraham, "Hear us, my lord. You are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb to hinder you from burying your dead." Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites and the people of the land. And he said to them, "If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat for me Ephraim, son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Maliekpa, which he owns. It is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence as property for a burying place." Now Ephraim was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephraim the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, of all who went in at the gate of his city, "No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the sight of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead." Then Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, "But if you will hear me, I give the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there." Ephron answered Abraham, "My lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver, what is that between you and me? Bury your dead." Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So the field of Ephron in Melechah, which was at the east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field throughout its whole area was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites, before all who went in at the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field at Melechah, east of Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is in it were made over to Abraham as property or a burying place by the Hittites. Chapter 23. It's so heavy reading that, because while most of the chapter was talking about the exchange that Abraham had with the Hittites, I don't want it to be lost on us that Abraham's life partner died. She lives 127 years. They've been married for decades. They've been married for a very, very long time. And so just thinking about the life and the love that they've shared, and to have Abraham go through that and to have to bury his wife, I don't want to just speed into the rest of the chapter, just allowing the humanity of it to really resonate with us, that this was a man who was married to his wife for a very long time, and we were privy to his life, to her life, the ups and the downs, when she didn't believe God and tried to say that she didn't hear God when he was talking about her having a son, and she was laughing to herself. We see Sarah when she tried to solve her problem on her own, it ended up creating a bigger problem. We see and experience the joy that Sarah experienced when she actually had Isaac. And so to actually see that her journey on this earth came to an end, I don't want us to just kind of read through the word to read through the word. I really want us to look at this as humans and lives and what they've gone through and how we can learn from their experiences. And so it certainly hit home that Sarah is no longer a part of the story of Abraham at this point, but it also speaks to a transition of the story shifting as we proceed through the next few chapters. We'll see that Abraham himself is no longer going to be a main character, that it's going to begin to shift to that next generation. And so outside of, as we mentioned, Sarah's death, we also see the exchange between Abraham and Ephron, the Hittite. And what I love about this is that Abraham does not take from Ephron the Hittite, even though he could, even though Ephron offered and said, just take this 400 shekels. Like, what is that between you and me? Like downplaying the fact that, hey, you can just take this from me and it's going to be okay because of who you are and because you are a prince among us. Like, just take it. It's fine. And we see that in this particular moment, again, we've watched the character development of Abraham as well. And we know, while we don't know, of course, the ins and outs of him or of really any character in the book, we know some of the things that he's dealt with as well, but he's always dealt with, when it comes to money in particular, he's always done what was right. Even if we think back a few chapters about Abraham and Melchizedek, and when the king of Sodom was trying to essentially give him animals and give him money for defeating the enemies who were trying to take advantage of Sodom, Abraham said, no, look, I swore before God I wasn't going to take anything from you. And even now we see that Abraham is not relying on the fact that these people have a perception of him. He's like, listen, I'm not going off of that. What I'm going off of is the fact that you need, like, this is an even exchange. You have something that I need to bury my dead, and I'm going to pay you for it. And I just appreciate the fact that he didn't rely on what they were saying. He didn't rely on the fact that they look at him as a prince of God among us. Like, he was like, listen, I'm still taking something from you, and I need to pay you for allowing me to take this from you. So that was just my commentary from chapter 23. So moving along to chapter 24, Isaac and Rebekah. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me in this land. Must I take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham said to him, see to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house, from the land of my kindred, who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send an angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels, let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. But by this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing 1/2 shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels and said, please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. She added, we have plenty of straw and fodder and room to spend the night. The man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord and said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman. Then the young woman ran and told her mother's household all these things. Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out toward the man to the spring. As soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms and heard the words of Rebekah his sister, "Thus the man spoke to me," he went to the man. And behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. He said, "Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels." So the man came to the house and unharnessed the camels and gave straw and fodder to the camels, and there was water to wash his feet. Then food was set before him to eat. But he said, "I will not eat until I have said what I have to say." He said, "Speak on." So he said, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become great. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male servants and female servants, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old, and to him he has given all that he has. My master made me swear, saying, 'You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house and to my clan and take a wife for my son.' I said to my master, 'Perhaps the woman will not follow me.' But he said to him, 'The Lord before whom I have walked will send his angel with you and prosper your way. You shall take a wife for my son from my clan and from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my clan. And if they will not give her to you, you will be free from my oath.' I came today to the spring and said, 'O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now you are prospering the way that I go, behold, I am standing by the spring of water. Let the virgin who comes down to draw water, to whom I shall say, please give me a little water from your jar to drink, and who will say to me, drink. And I will draw for your camels also. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son.' Before I had finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew water. I said to her, 'Please let me drink.' She quickly let down her jar from her shoulder and said, 'Drink, and I will give your camels drink also.' So I drank, and she gave the camels drink also. Then I asked her, 'Whose daughter are you?' She said, 'The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him.' So I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her arms. Then I bowed my head and worshipped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now, if you are going to show steadfast love and faithfulness to my master, tell me. And if not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left." Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, "The thing has come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken." When Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself to the earth before the Lord. And the servant brought out jewelry of silver and gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave to her brother and to her mother costly ornaments. And he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. When they arose in the morning, he said, "Send me away to my master." Her brother and her mother said, "Let the young woman remain with us a while, at least 10 days. After that, she may go." But he said to them, "Do not delay me. Since the Lord has prospered my way, send me away that I may go to my master." They said, "Let us call the young woman and ask her." And they called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" She said, "I will go." So they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s. May your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him." Then Rebekah and her young women arose and rode on the camels, followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Now Isaac had returned from Beer-lahai-roi and was dwelling in the Negeb. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. And he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and she saw Isaac. She dismounted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things he had done. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife. And he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Chapter 24, there's so much detail in this chapter. So starting from the very top, when we think about the exchange that Abraham had with his servant, the exchange was so rich to me, but I think the piece that I love more than anything else comes from really verse 7. So in verse 7, this is where we see that Abraham, not fully, like he doesn't go into detail, but he just acknowledges the role that God has played in his life as he's talking to his servant, where he says, "The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send an angel before you, and you shall take a wife from my son from there." You can just hear the conviction in his voice that he knows, given everything that I've walked through with God in my life up until this particular point, I know that God will. He will, he's gonna send an angel. This is going to happen. I just love the conviction in which Abraham is speaking in this moment. It is amazing to me. And I absolutely want that for all of us as believers to be able to have experienced God throughout our lives to the point where we can speak to someone else and we can literally recall major turning points in our lives. And we can say, the God who did X, the God who did Y, I know that this is what he will do. I think that is just so incredible. And so as we continue to read on, we really follow and really hone in on the servant over the next few verses, which I love because it looks like this servant, I can't speak to the servant's beliefs or not, but I will say that from verse 10 and beyond, when the servant is speaking to God or praying to God, he says, "O Lord, God of my master Abraham." Because again, we don't necessarily know what the servant's true convictions and beliefs are, but we know that he is a faithful servant to his master. And because his master has said, "The God of heaven took me from my father's house, from a land of my kindred, who spoke to me and swore to me," Abraham is essentially, by talking about God in this fashion, he has given the servant enough insight to know, okay, if Abraham is saying, I'm going to be successful because of God, let me, when I go to this land, let me call on the name of God and let me speak to God. And as we can see in verse 15, as the servant is calling on God, before he's even done speaking, God has already answered the servant's prayer to be able to be successful on this mission and really to have certain events happen in order for the mission to actually be successful. And I love that. I love the fact that because of the initial transfer of faith, because to me, that's what I believe it is. When Abraham is talking about God in verse 7, so confidently, it lets the servant know that, okay, this is God. And so throughout this whole mission, if I'm going to be successful, I'm going to continue to mention God because that's really what this mission is hinging on. It's hinging on the belief in God, that God is going to bring this mission to success. And so, of course, we know once we get to the well, we see that the servant and Rebekah, they have this exchange. And then the servant ends up going back to the house with Rebekah, believing at this point that Rebekah is going to be Isaac's wife. And she is the answer to the prayer that the servant prayed. So we see that the servant has started to recount essentially from introducing himself in verse 33. And I love verse 33. I love the level of detail that the Bible gives, because the Bible literally says, The food was set before him. And before he went to eat, the servant said, I will not eat until I have said what I have to say. And then we see where it says, he said, speak on. That has to be Laban speaking, saying, go ahead and say what you have to say. So we know that this servant, he's about his business, right? If up until this point in the story, we've not gotten that the servant is about his business, this is letting us know the servant is about his business. His food, I'm convinced his food was cold, because he was speaking all the way from verse 34 all the way down to verse 50. Like, he was talking for a long time, so I know his food was cold. But again, it speaks to the fact that this servant was like about his business, and he was not going to engage in any pleasantry until he was able to accomplish the mission of his master. That level of loyalty, is definitely something to be desired in this day and age. But if you are able to find someone, not even from like a master servant perspective, but just in general, whether you have a friend or you have a partner or whoever you have in your life, and they have that level of loyalty to you where I'm going to sacrifice my own personal pleasure and I'm going to accomplish what needs to be accomplished first, that's huge. And I know that it may seem like it was funny, but we got to think at this point, the servant left where he was with Abraham. We don't know if he ate, but he was out there at that well waiting for those young ladies to come down, still hadn't ate. Hours went by and he has food in front of him and he still does not eat until he accomplishes his mission. Like, that is huge. That is pivotal. And again, it really speaks to the fact that the loyalty that this servant had toward Abraham was just very different. So again, from verse 34 to verse 50, the servant really recounts everything that we already know as readers happened. But I do love the fact that the Bible includes the servant's dialogue and what he's recounting to Laban and to the people. It just really helps with the character development, because we can see how the servant is really just laying out all of the facts in front of Rebekah's family at this point. And so from 50 really all the way to verse 60, we see that the servant's like giving them gifts, thanking them. And then the family's trying to keep Rebekah for a few more days. And Rebekah's like, listen, I'm okay with actually going with him. We don't need to stay a few more days. I can go, right? And so we see that Rebekah actually goes with him. And then we see that in verse 62 throughout the end, before we get to chapter 25, we see that Isaac is in the field and he looks up and he sees Rebekah. And Rebekah, of course, covers herself with a veil, and they ultimately come together as husband and wife. And I love this last sentence. So Isaac was comforted after the death of his mother, because again, the human aspect of this story is that his mother died. And if you lost a parent, let alone a mother, you know that, especially if I don't want to assume everyone had a great relationship with their mother, but even if it's not your mother, if it's your grandmother, if it's your aunt, any older woman figure in your life who nurtured you and took care of you, you know that their love and their support and who they are can never be replaced. And so we see that Isaac received some comfort from having Rebekah as his wife. And so moving on to chapter 25, Abraham's death and his descendants. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Asherim, Leshuim, and Lenuim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Hanok, Abidiah, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. But to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac to eastward to the east country. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac his son, and Isaac settled at Beer-lahai. These are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their birth: Nahibo, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, Abel, Bibshan, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadad, Tema, Jutar, Naphish, and Kedama. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names, by their villages and by their encampments, 12 princes according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. They settled from Haviel to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria. He settled over against all his kinsmen. The birth of Esau and Jacob. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Armenian, of Padam Haran, the sister of Laban, the Armenian, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah his wife conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger." When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. Afterward his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore him. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Esau sells his birthright. Once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of the red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore, his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So chapter 25, some of the main takeaways, of course, the first one I want to hone in on is Abraham's death. Similar to Sarah, it is the end of someone that we've watched from the onset, from him leaving his father's home to traveling to different places, to saying his wife was his sister, to having a child with Hagar. Like, there's so much of Abraham's story that we have the privilege of being privy to. So, of course, seeing that he's no longer in the story, that he's passed on, is definitely something that I don't want us to take lightly. I know as mentioned earlier, as we're reading, we want to not necessarily just read through like, oh, this is an interesting story while someone dies on to the next. Like, this is a character that was put in the Bible for the purpose of us understanding and gleaning wisdom from his life, understanding the role that he played in the grand scheme of Jesus coming to earth. And so it's very, very important that we acknowledge the role that Abraham played while also continuing to think about what is his life in the grand scheme of God's plan to bring salvation to the earth. And that, of course, is just from verse 1 of chapter 25, really down to verse 11 is where we see the Bible talking about Abraham's death and where he's buried. And when we get into verses 12 through 18, this is where we see that Ishmael is back on the scene because he was the brother that was with Isaac and actually helped him bury his father. And so from 12 to 18, the Bible is just giving us a quick snippet of Ishmael's history and what came after him. And so again, love the fact that the Bible just included that in there for us to have the insight about what happened to Ishmael. But as we continue into verses 19 and beyond, we see that Rachel is pregnant with Isaac's twins. And it's interesting that the Lord already set up the situation and basically gave us a little bit of insight into the future that these children were going to have, because he said that there are 2 nations in your womb and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. And shortly after that, we see in verse 29 that Esau begins to sell his birthright for a bowl of lentil soup. 29 through 34 is really where I want to spend a good bit of time for a couple of reasons. Number one, I want to look at it from Esau's perspective and then look at it from Jacob's perspective. And hopefully we can glean something as humans from both of their perspectives. So we see that Esau, he's coming from a hard day of work and he was exhausted. And so he clearly expresses that. He expresses to Jacob in verse 30, he says, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Jacob responds and says, "Sell me your birthright now." And Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. From Esau's perspective, don't allow a temporary emotion to make you make a permanent decision. Because one, if he came in from the field and he was physically exhausted, make sure that when you are engaging in conversations that you're really up to engaging in that particular conversation. Don't wait until you get off work to talk about your finances with your spouse, because that's not necessarily the best time to have that type of conversation, especially if you're already irritable and you're already exhausted and you're already feeling like 10,000 other things. That's just not using wisdom. And on the flip side of that, for Jacob, making sure that if we look at this from the lens of Jacob, that we don't prey on the fact that someone else is in a weaker state and we're going to take advantage of the fact that you're in a weaker state. In this scenario here in the Bible, we see that Jacob is preying on the fact that Esau is exhausted versus Jacob engaging in this conversation when Esau's all the way there, when he's not exhausted, when he is ready to take on the world. He chooses to engage in this conversation when we know that Esau is, as the Bible tells us, is exhausted and he feels like he's about to die because he's that exhausted. And the reason why I wanted to look at this from both perspectives is because, one, when we look at it from Jacob's perspective, it allows us to make sure that we steward well the things and the people that are given to us and that we're not trying to get opportunities. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that my brother is exhausted and he feels like he's about to die. And because he feels that way, I'm going to ask him for his birthright. I don't know if he's really about to die by being out in the field or if this is just how we can be extreme and how we can how we can be facetious and stretch the truth, if you will. He might have just really, really wanted that food and he might have honestly been tired. But to say that you're tired to the point of death, I think is a different thing entirely. But either way, or Esau, making sure that when we make decisions in 2024 as humans, that we are cognizant of the types of decisions that we're making, and we're not making decisions based off of emotion, based off of, we're having a very serious conversation. As mentioned earlier, use wisdom. And if you know, don't ever feel pressure to talk about something when you don't want to talk about it. You can easily say things like, let's engage in this dialogue tomorrow. Or give me 30 minutes. Let me take a shower, or whatever the situation is. Just making sure that the lesson from both Esau and from Jacob is to make sure that we use wisdom in our dealings with others, even family, as we see here, they're family, but that still doesn't stop Jacob from trying to manipulate the situation and actually succeeding in getting Esau's birthright. So making sure that we move with wisdom and with discernment as we engage with others in this world. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found some value out of this content. If you did, please leave me a rating or review wherever you are listening. This would mean the world to me. I'd also love to hear from you on social media. Please feel free to reach out on Twitter at His Eternal Word, 1. And also please feel free to reach out to me on Instagram as well at His Eternal Word. Visit our website at www.hiseternalword.com, and I hope you stay tuned for the next episode.